Here for you now is another forgotten animated movie, in as much as any Disney film can be considered forgotten. 1981's The Fox and the Hound. It's certainly one of their less celebrated movies, although it is actually a fairly big hit for them at the time. And I watched this movie a billion times when I was a kid, but until last night, I had not seen it in probably 30 years, legitimately 30 years. One of the things I love about doing Load Bearing Beams, my podcast, is finding out about the history of a movie's production, especially when it's a movie that I loved growing up, when I at least, I'm sure other people did, but I didn't. I didn't think about movies. I didn't think about the fact that movies don't just materialize into the universe. They are the product of a lot of people working very, very hard. And so The Fox and the Hound, this very sweet movie about some cute animals. It's best known today as the movie that nearly destroyed the Walt Disney Company, and it caused a schism in the animation world, and it was stitched together with a skeleton crew and with people who were at odds with each other and their vision about how animation should work, how about this movie should be conceptualized and executed, and how animation should work more generally. But when I watch it now, I'm shocked at how well it works, how well it holds together. And it's not one of the all-time Disney classics, but it has some really, really extraordinary moments, especially in terms of character animation. But some background for you. So I am working on watching every Disney animated feature in chronological order, and I have finally arrived at the 1980s. I've just completed basically the roughest stretch for Disney's animated output, this very rudderless period after Walt Disney died in 1967. And although even before his death, his attention had drifted away from animation, from the animation studio to all kinds of other business ventures, especially the theme parks. So the studio was left in the hands of Disney's famous 9 old men. This was a team of 9 men whose names you will see on basically every Disney animated movie, starting with Snow White in 1937. Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, Ward Kimball, Eric Larson, and others. One of the other 9 old men was Wolfgang Reitherman, and he is credited as the director for every Disney animated movie, starting with Sword in the Stone in 1963. And then as the 70s came to a close, he was tasked with directing Disney's next project, The Fox and the Hound. But meanwhile, there was a new generation of animators coming up through the Disney pipeline, and this generation has some of the most important names in animation of the last 40 years. John Lasseter, Brad Bird, John Musker, Ron Clements, even Tim Burton, and these people all worked on The Fox and the Hound. But this generation of young animators, they're hungry to make their mark, shake up the old dusty way that Disney made animation, made animated movies. And bridging the gap between these two generations, between the 9 old men and the new guys coming up, was Don Bluth. And he had steadily worked at Disney for all of the 1970s, culminating in his being the lead animator for the live-action animated hybrid Pete's Dragon from 1977. So the Don Bluth story and the story of his split with Disney, it's very complicated, and I am no expert. If you're an expert, please forgive me if I get some of the details wrong or get them out of order. But basically, as the studio was run by the 9 old men, and the emphasis there should be on the word old. They had a very set way of doing things and of how stories should be told, and they weren't interested in changing. And according to Bluth, they weren't interested in handing over the reins to a younger generation. I addressed this in an older video, how Disney, for a long time, until the late 80s, their way that they developed animated movies was it all started with the animators rather than with traditional screenplays. So animators had virtually all of the power in terms of how the stories were told, in terms of both the story itself and then the animation style. And in terms of both of those things, Bluth and his younger cohorts thought Disney was extremely stodgy, that they were resistant to evolving, and they had already done a considerable amount of work on Fox and the Hound when they abruptly quit Disney, and that left the studio hobbled, having to push back the release of Fox and the Hound, and having lost a considerable portion of their workforce. And this was a time, keep in mind, when Disney only released a new movie every 4 or 5 years, and the company was really struggling. And meanwhile, Don Bluth went and started his own rival studio. They'd go on to produce The Secret of Nim in 1982, and then An American Tail in 1986. And this was kind of the first viable threat to Disney in American animated movies. So the studio, Disney, had to make concessions to the younger animators who remained, including promotions. Okay, so Wolfgang Reitherman and his co-director Art Stevens, they start having creative battles with each other over The Fox and the Hound. Now, Art Stevens is in his 50s at the time, but somehow he represents youth. He represents the future at this geriatric company. Stevens and his team, they want to do things like they want to have a death occur in the movie to one of the major characters in the movie. And Reitherman says, like, no way, we've never done that. We're not going to start doing that now. So these two start butting heads, and the studio actually sides with Art Stevens, with the younger man and with the younger animators who are more on his side. And so Reitherman is ordered off the project. And then the final credited directors of the movie are Art Stevens along with Richard Rich and Berman. But apparently Reitherman continued working on the movie, like in secret against orders. So you have, for The Fox and the Hound, for this movie, this adorable movie about cute little baby animals, all these cooks in the kitchen, all these competing agendas, and it makes for a fascinating movie. This movie is a mess. It's a hodgepodge of different tones. They don't cohere at all. There are musical sequences that come out of nowhere and don't fit with the tone of what you're watching. And yet it all kind of works. So you start in this movie with an adorable little baby fox and a hound puppy who become unlikely best friends. Aw, and they are voiced by real children. One of them, an 8-year-old Corey Feldman, and them being voiced by real kids, just talking like real kids talk. It works so well. It's super cute, super sweet. You get to see them bonding with each other, even though we know the destination here is that the hound dog he's being trained as a professional killer of foxes, and so eventually he will set his sights upon his old ex-friend. But there's this time jump, and I got to tell you, having watched all these Disney movies, I thought it couldn't get worse than when you jump from little Bambi to grown-up Bambi, from child Bambi to adult Bambi's voice. It always sucks when you hear the adult voice, but this one, I mean, the adult fox the fox going from a cute little baby to 60-year-old Mickey Rooney.
Always be friends forever, won't we?
Oh, it's me, all right.
It's something else, and but the hound dog, meanwhile, as an adult, is voiced by Kurt Russell. Just in those two voices, I realized you have sort of competing visions for the movie. You have old Hollywood and Mickey Rooney, and then this up and coming kind of new younger guy, Kurt Russell. One of the big battles that the animation team had was over the fate of Chief, the older dog who mentors the young hound dog and turns him into a killing machine. So midway through the movie, there's a chase. The fox gets chased through the woods, and he leads Chief and his old friend, the hound. The fox's name is Todd. The hound's name is Copper. Leads them to some train tracks, and then Chief inadvertently falls off the train tracks into a river below. And so the younger animators in the story department thought this is where Chief should die. Everything hinges in this movie. The hound, Copper, is going to turn against his old best friend, and he needs to have an actual motivation to do it. So Chief needs to die here, but the old men in the studio got their way. Chief survives. He just has a broken leg. But everything in the movie after that operates as if he did die. So it's just so emotionally unsatisfying. The hound has no actual reason to turn against his best friend. Anyway, all of the movie culminates in the hound, Copper, and his owner, voiced by Jack Albertson, who was Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And they're hunting the fox, and they get attacked by a bear. And then the fox, Todd, rather than using this as his chance to escape for good, he returns to help his old friend. And then once they get away from the bear, the Copper, the hound dog, Kurt Russell, is like, oh, I guess I do love my old friend. And so the hunter is about to shoot the fox dead, and then Copper steps in the way. Now, this is honestly some of the best animated acting I have ever seen. This entire sequence is wordless. None of these three characters say anything to each other. It's all in their body language and their facial expressions. The hunter doesn't understand why his dog is disobeying him, but eventually he shrugs and slumps away, and that's the resolution of the movie. And again, it's all wordless. It's an incredible scene. It makes the movie worth watching all by itself. So this is not one of Disney's all-timers, but it's a highlight for this bad 20-year stretch of Disney's animated feature films. But I know what you're thinking. I know what you're asking. You're asking, what would Karl Marx think of this movie? Is there a Marxist reading of The Fox and the Hound? And I'm here to tell you that, of course, there is. This movie, I think it's a biting commentary on how the ruling class disrupts any chance of working class solidarity emerging to then combat the ruling class, in this case, the ruling class being the hunter voiced by Grandpa Joe. And the Fox and the Hound here represent different ethnicities or racial groups who, if they did not have outside interference, if they were just left to their own devices, would be best friends. They'd be the little hound and fox who just want to hang out and go swimming and be best friends together. But instead, the ruling class comes along and says, no, your lot in life is to hunt and yours is to be hunted. So class solidarity, working class solidarity, abated by the ruling class. Wow, this movie has so much to say. Did you like The Fox and the Hound when you were a kid? Let me know. I don't feel like this movie has much of a cultural memory, but every movie I talk about turns out people are like, oh, I love that movie. How dare you say it's not good? But this movie's good. I liked it. Anyway, those are my thoughts.